When I first moved into the neighborhood, I thought I had finally found peace. After years of renting small apartments in crowded cities, the dream of having my own house with a backyard felt like a fresh start. The community seemed quiet, the lawns neatly kept, and the air had that suburban stillness that makes you think everything will always remain calm. The first week was uneventful. I introduced myself to a few neighbors, waved at joggers passing by in the morning, and spent the evenings unpacking boxes. My golden retriever, Max, was just as thrilled as I was. For the first time in his life, he had a big yard to run around in, and the freedom to enjoy open space. Max wasn't just a pet to me, he was family. He had been with me since college, through breakups, career changes, and long nights of loneliness. His gentle nature made him beloved by kids who passed by, and even the mailman sometimes stopped to give him a scratch on the head. There was nothing aggressive about Max, nothing out of the ordinary. He barked occasionally, like any dog would, usually when the garbage truck rolled through or when a squirrel dared to invade the yard. But he wasn't excessive, and I was careful to keep him well trained. That's why the first letter from the HOA hit me like a brick. It came in a plain envelope, slipped under my door late in the evening. The letter stated that a concerned neighbor had filed an official noise complaint regarding my dog. It claimed that Max barked, continuously and aggressively, disturbing the peace of the neighborhood. The letter also carried a stern warning: repeated complaints could lead to fines or even removal of the pet under HOA rules. I was stunned. Max wasn't loud. The neighborhood was far from silent, leaf blowers buzzed in the mornings, kids shouted as they played in the cul-de-sac, and delivery trucks rattled down the streets. Yet somehow, my dog had been singled out as the threat to peace. It didn't take long to figure out who was behind it. Across the street lived a woman named Linda, though everyone whispered another name for her, Karen. She had the signature haircut, the permanent scowl, and a reputation for meddling in everyone's business. I had caught her glaring at Max once or twice, muttering under her breath as she hurried to her car. She was known for policing everything, from the shade of curtains people used to the number of flower pots on porches. If there was a rule in the HOA handbook, Karen wielded it like a weapon. I tried to ignore the first complaint, assuming it was a one-off annoyance. But within a week, a second letter arrived, this time more aggressive in tone. It included documentation of the alleged barking, which turned out to be vague notes like dog barking at 7:15 p.m. or continuous barking at midnight. The times listed didn't even make sense. Max was always inside with me at night. The absurdity of it only fueled my frustration. Karen had made it her mission to target me, and worse, she was trying to weaponize the HOA to get rid of Max. It wasn't just petty, it was personal. The thought of losing my dog over false accusations made my stomach turn. At first, I considered fighting back directly. I thought about installing cameras, gathering evidence, and proving that Max wasn't the menace she claimed he was. But something held me back. A gut feeling whispered that this wasn't just about my dog. Karen had a certain desperation in her eyes when she confronted people. It was as though she needed control, needed to assert power in a life that otherwise felt empty. And then, a small observation cracked everything open. Late one night, as I was taking Max for a quick walk, I noticed unusual activity at Karen's house. Cars would pull up quietly, headlights dimmed, and people would slip in and out within minutes. The visits weren't social, they had a pattern, a secrecy that didn't match casual neighbors dropping by. On weekends, the traffic doubled. Boxes were carried inside, some sealed, others taped hastily. It didn't add up. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia. Maybe she was running a small online business, storing packages. But as I paid more attention, the more suspicious it became. Deliveries weren't coming from UPS or FedEx. They came from unmarked vans, driven by people who didn't look like delivery workers. They avoided eye contact, and they never stayed long enough for a friendly chat. The more I watched, the clearer it became, Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was hiding something in plain sight. Suddenly, her obsession with my dog made sense. Max barked most often when strangers approached. Maybe she wasn't upset about the noise at all. Maybe Max was a problem because he noticed the comings and goings at her house, a furry witness to her secret. I realized then that I wasn't just defending Max anymore. This wasn't just about a dog barking. This was about exposing the hypocrisy of a woman who was willing to ruin others while covering up her own mess. Karen wanted to play by the rules when it suited her, but she had no problem breaking them behind closed doors. The idea of digging deeper began to take root. If Karen wanted a war, then I would give her one, but not the kind she expected. She thought she could scare me into silence with HOA complaints. Instead, I would uncover the truth she had been desperately trying to hide. I didn't know yet what exactly she was running out of her home, but I had a feeling it wasn't something small or harmless. And if I was right, the fallout wouldn't just silence her complaints about Max. It would turn the entire neighborhood against her. The first step was to gather proof. And that's where the real story begins. Once the seed of suspicion had been planted, it was impossible to ignore. Every time I looked out my window at Karen's house, I noticed something off. The timing of visitors was too irregular to be casual friends. The boxes that went in and out were too frequent to be an innocent hobby. And the secrecy that cloaked her activity, people avoiding eye contact, cars parked a few streets away instead of in front of her home, spoke volumes. I knew that whatever she was doing, it wasn't legitimate. But proving it would require more than just gut feelings and late-night observations. I needed evidence, real, undeniable proof that Karen was operating some kind of shady business out of her home. And if I could get that evidence, the HOA that she had been weaponizing against me would turn against her. I started simple. I adjusted my security cameras so that one faced the street more clearly. From there, I was able to capture the comings and goings at Karen's house. Within days, the pattern became obvious. Cars arrived at odd hours, often after midnight. People carried in boxes but left empty-handed, or sometimes carried bags back out that looked fuller than when they entered. Max would bark each time, and now I realized his instincts weren't just harmless noise, he was reacting to suspicious activity. I cataloged the footage carefully, timestamping each visit. Within a week, I had hours of evidence, more than 24 cars, different drivers each time, all slipping in and out under the cover of darkness. Next, I took to the neighborhood Facebook group. While Karen was notorious for posting passive-aggressive complaints about everyone else, from overgrown lawns to kids leaving bikes on sidewalks, I kept my tone neutral. I casually asked if anyone else had noticed increased traffic in the neighborhood late at night. The responses came quickly. A few neighbors mentioned cars they didn't recognize, parked awkwardly in driveways or along curbs. One woman admitted she'd seen boxes stacked in Karen's garage during a yard sale months earlier, far more than a normal household would have. Another neighbor even recalled a strange chemical smell drifting from her backyard one evening. The pieces were starting to connect. But I didn't stop there. Curiosity pushed me to dig deeper. During one of Max's late walks, I looped past Karen's property. Her blinds were always drawn tight, but the faint glow of fluorescent lighting leaked through the cracks. And then, faintly, I heard it, the rhythmic hum of machines, the kind of sound you don't expect in a suburban home. The more I pieced together, the more I realized this was bigger than some harmless online resale business. This had the hallmarks of something illicit. Maybe counterfeit goods, maybe unlicensed distribution. Whatever it was, it certainly wasn't permitted under HOA rules, or the law. Still, I couldn't make wild accusations without solid proof. I needed a closer look. So I devised a plan. On trash day, I made sure to walk Max by Karen's bins after the trucks had rolled through but before she pulled the cans back in. To my surprise, the bags weren't ordinary household waste. Cardboard inserts from electronics, plastic wrap, and labels from bulk shipments were piled inside. None of it matched the life of a single homeowner. It was the trash of someone processing goods on a large scale. I snapped photos, careful not to draw attention. Over the next week, the picture sharpened further. Karen wasn't just being a busybody neighbor, she was hiding behind her crusade against me and Max to distract from her own empire of rule-breaking. The HOA had no tolerance for pets making noise, yet she was turning her entire house into an illegal warehouse. The irony was almost poetic. She had tried to use the HOA handbook like a sword, but now that same handbook would be the blade that cut her down. The hardest part was keeping quiet. Every time I received another letter about Max, filled with Karen's exaggerated claims, I wanted to march over and throw my growing pile of evidence in her face. But patience was the key. The more rope she gave herself, the harder she would fall. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began murmuring. Whispers spread about Karen's late-night visitors, about the smells, about the traffic. People began to question why she was so intent on going after everyone else's violations while ignoring her own. The Facebook group, once her stage for lectures, began turning against her. It was in those moments that I realized I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Others had been rubbed the wrong way by Karen's policing. The community had been waiting for someone to stand up to her, and with each piece of evidence I uncovered, I was becoming that person. One evening, as another unmarked van pulled up, I captured a particularly telling scene on my camera. Two men hauled in boxes so large they barely fit through the doorway. Karen stood at the entrance, clipboard in hand, checking things off as if she were running a business right there in her living room. That footage was the smoking gun I needed. From there, I began preparing my case. I compiled the footage, the photos, the neighbor testimonies, and even a copy of the HOA bylaws that explicitly prohibited running any commercial operation out of a home. Karen wasn't just bending the rules, she was shattering them. And the best part? She had no idea. While she scribbled her false complaints about Max, she didn't realize I was quietly building a case that would dismantle her carefully hidden operation. By the time I was done, I didn't just have enough evidence to clear Max's name. I had enough to ensure that Karen's reputation, her influence, and possibly even her home itself would crumble. The next step was deciding how to strike. Should I take it straight to the HOA board and let them handle it? Or should I escalate to the authorities and let the law come crashing down on her doorstep? As I debated, another complaint letter arrived in the mail, this one threatening me with fines if the dog situation wasn't resolved. It was the push I needed. I knew then that I wasn't going to the HOA first. I was going straight to the police. The decision to involve the police weighed heavily on me at first, but once it was made, there was no going back. I had endured Karen's harassment long enough, and Max deserved better than to be labeled a nuisance just because a neighbor had something to hide. With every shred of evidence I had collected, I knew I wasn't just standing up for myself anymore, I was standing up for the entire neighborhood. I began by compiling everything into a single file. The security footage, the timestamps, the photos of trash with packaging materials, the screenshots from the Facebook group discussions, and even the bylaws from the HOA handbook. It looked less like a complaint and more like a case file, something a detective could immediately recognize as credible. When I walked into the local police department, I felt both nervous and resolute. The officer at the desk listened politely as I explained the situation. My neighbor was running what looked like an illegal business out of her home, possibly distributing unlicensed or counterfeit goods. I carefully avoided making it sound personal, even though deep down I wanted to scream about the letters, the fines, and the constant harassment over Max. The officer accepted the file, flipping through the photos and watching a clip of the late-night deliveries. His expression changed from mild courtesy to interest, then to concern. He excused himself, and when he returned, he had another officer with him. They asked questions: how long had this been happening, how consistent was the traffic, whether I'd noticed anything hazardous like chemicals or suspicious fumes. I answered truthfully, careful not to exaggerate. By the time I left the station, the officers had assured me that the matter would be looked into. They couldn't promise immediate action, but the evidence was compelling enough to warrant an investigation. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight on my chest lighten. The following days unfolded slowly, but with each one, I could sense the undercurrent of change. A police cruiser began making occasional passes down our quiet street at odd hours, parking for a few minutes before moving on. It was subtle, but I noticed. So did Karen. Her behavior began to shift. The parade of cars slowed. Deliveries that had been nightly became sporadic. And when she walked Max's side of the block, she no longer carried herself with the smug superiority she once did. Instead, her eyes darted nervously, as if waiting for something, or someone, to appear. The neighborhood, however, was buzzing. People whispered about the patrol cars. Some speculated it was just routine. Others guessed someone was in trouble. I kept my silence, but I watched carefully as the tide began to turn. Then it happened. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the rooftops, two unmarked cars pulled up quietly near Karen's house. A team of plainclothes officers stepped out, moving with deliberate calm. They approached her door, knocked firmly, and waited. From my window, I could see Karen's face when she answered. Shock, confusion, and then the quick attempt to plaster on her usual mask of authority. But this time, it didn't work. The officers showed their badges, and within moments, they were inside her house. The next hour felt surreal. I couldn't hear much, but I could see enough. Officers moved in and out, carrying boxes, snapping photos, documenting everything. One of them emerged holding a clipboard eerily similar to the one I had seen Karen clutching during her deliveries. Another carried out what looked like large black bags, sealed tight. The neighbors gathered in small clusters at the ends of driveways, pretending not to watch but unable to look away. Whispers turned into gasps as more items were removed. Some speculated aloud about drugs, others about stolen goods. The truth didn't matter yet, what mattered was that Karen's carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time. And then came the moment that solidified everything. An officer wheeled out a dolly stacked with boxes labeled with brand names, electronics, luxury goods, items far too expensive to be moving through a single suburban home. The officers weren't carrying groceries. They were dismantling an operation. By the time the police left, Karen stood in her doorway, pale and shaken. The usual fire in her expression was gone, replaced by something rawer, fear. She clutched her arms across her chest, watching as her secrets were carted away into evidence vans. That night, the Facebook group lit up like wildfire. Photos circulated, grainy, but clear enough to show the scene. People speculated, rumors spread, and for once, Karen had no snide comment to offer. The woman who had wielded the HOA as her personal weapon now stood at the center of neighborhood gossip, and no one was rushing to her defense. Despite everything, I stayed quiet. I didn't post, I didn't comment, I didn't gloat. I knew better than to draw attention to myself just yet. The investigation wasn't over, and Karen wasn't done lashing out. If there was one thing I had learned about her, it was that she wouldn't go down without a fight. Sure enough, within days, I received another letter from the HOA. This time, however, it wasn't just about Max. It accused me of slander, of spreading false rumors that had caused irreparable harm to Karen's reputation. She had filed a formal complaint, demanding that I be fined and possibly removed from the community. It would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. Even as the walls closed in on her, Karen was still trying to twist the system to punish me. But what she didn't realize was that the system was no longer on her side. The HOA had already begun to distance itself, quietly removing her posts from the community board and ignoring her escalating demands. Still, the letter was a reminder: Karen wasn't finished. She was desperate, and desperation made people dangerous. What Karen didn't know was that I had one more piece of evidence up my sleeve, something I hadn't yet shared with the authorities. Something that would end any chance she had of clawing her way back into power. And soon, it would be time to reveal it. The morning after the police raid, the neighborhood felt different. The same manicured lawns, the same quiet cul-de-sacs, but there was an invisible charge in the air. People glanced at each other more often, their conversations hushed but urgent. For years, Karen had been the self-appointed watchdog of the community, policing lawns, barking about violations, and filing complaints like it was her profession. But now, she was no longer the one holding the clipboard of authority, she was the subject of whispers. At first, Karen tried to carry on as though nothing had changed. She strutted through the neighborhood in her oversized sunglasses, shoulders squared, chin lifted high, pretending the raid hadn't happened. When someone looked her way, she forced a tight smile, as if to silently remind them that she was still in control. But her neighbors weren't buying it anymore. The facade was cracking, and people had seen too much. Every time she passed, conversation stopped abruptly, replaced by stifled laughter or knowing glances. For someone who thrived on control, the loss of respect was more painful than the raid itself. And yet, rather than stepping back, Karen doubled down. She began posting obsessively in the HOA's online forum, ranting about malicious neighbors, spreading lies and insisting that the police presence was nothing more than a routine misunderstanding. She accused unnamed individuals of orchestrating a smear campaign against her, and although she never mentioned me by name, everyone knew who she meant. The comments section became a battleground. Some residents voiced sympathy, unwilling to believe that the woman who had once hosted block parties could be guilty of anything shady. But the majority had grown tired of her reign of terror. They responded with thinly veiled sarcasm, reminding her of the countless fines she had dished out over mailbox colors, holiday decorations, and lawn heights. One neighbor posted a blurry picture from the raid with the caption, "Routine misunderstanding, huh?" Karen didn't take it well. She fired back with accusations, claiming that the HOA board was corrupt, that neighbors were jealous, that she was being persecuted because she cared more about the neighborhood than anyone else. Behind the scenes, however, she was unraveling. Delivery trucks that once arrived like clockwork no longer pulled into her driveway. Her blinds were drawn more often, her trash cans mysteriously lighter. Whatever she had been running was drying up, and the pressure was beginning to show. And then she struck back at me directly. It began with another official letter, this time delivered by hand. Karen had filed a complaint not just with the HOA, but with the county, accusing me of operating an unlicensed kennel. According to her report, Max's constant barking indicated I was harboring multiple dogs, running some kind of side business of my own. The irony was almost laughable, but the paperwork wasn't. It meant inspectors would have to visit my property, wasting my time and forcing me to defend myself against baseless claims. I was furious, but also unsurprised. This was Karen's way. She didn't know how to accept defeat, so she lashed out, dragging others down with her. The inspection came quickly. A polite county officer showed up, clipboard in hand, apologetic even before he stepped foot inside. He'd already been briefed on the complaint and admitted it seemed exaggerated. A walk through my home and backyard was enough to clear me, one dog, no business, nothing illegal. He even gave Max a pat on the head before leaving. But the damage had been done. Karen's accusations were now public record, another mess for me to clean up, another attempt to smear my name. She was fighting a losing battle, but she was determined to make it as messy as possible. What she didn't realize was that her every move was only digging her hole deeper. The HOA board had grown tired of her antics, and for the first time in years, they began ignoring her demands. Fines she issued were quietly reversed. Complaints she filed were dismissed before ever reaching homeowners. The woman who had once held the entire community hostage with her pen and clipboard was losing her grip, and it showed. I knew the time had come to release the final piece of evidence I'd been holding onto. It wasn't dramatic footage of cars or boxes. It wasn't whispers or speculation. It was concrete proof, receipts from online transactions linked to Karen's address. I had stumbled upon them weeks earlier while researching her operation. Customers had complained in forums about receiving fake products, and one frustrated buyer had posted a photo of the return address label. It matched Karen's home exactly. I had hesitated to share it before, worried it might cross a line. But now, with Karen weaponizing the system against me, it was clear, the line had already been crossed. I compiled the receipts into a document and submitted them to the HOA board along with a short, factual note. No accusations, no dramatic flair, just evidence that one of their own was engaged in illegal activity. I sent a similar packet to the police department, attaching a cover letter to connect the dots between the raid, the deliveries, and the fraudulent goods. The fallout was immediate. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, one that Karen was conspicuously not invited to. Within days, a notice went out. Karen was suspended from her role in HOA affairs pending further investigation. She could no longer issue fines, file complaints on behalf of the board, or participate in official discussions. For the neighborhood, it was liberation. For Karen, it was humiliation. Her response was as volatile as expected. She stormed onto Facebook, typing furious rants about conspiracies and betrayal. She accused the entire neighborhood of ganging up on her, painting herself as the victim of a witch hunt. But this time, nobody rallied behind her. The comments were quiet, the likes non-existent. She was shouting into a void, and for someone like Karen, silence was the deepest cut. Yet I knew better than to relax. She wasn't gone, not yet. A person like Karen didn't just vanish quietly. She was cornered now, and cornered people had a way of doing the unexpected. The raid had exposed her business. The receipts had stripped her of authority. The neighbors had turned against her. And yet, Karen still had one card left to play. I just didn't know when she would use it. The suspension stripped Karen of the one thing she valued most, control. For years, she had wielded the HOA as both sword and shield, a weapon she used to bend the neighborhood to her will. But with that power gone, she was just another resident, and for Karen, that was unbearable. At first, she tried to act unaffected. She maintained her morning routines, marching down the street with her coffee mug and oversized sunglasses, but the illusion was fragile. Behind the dark lenses, her eyes darted nervously, and her steps lacked their old confidence. She looked less like a woman surveying her kingdom and more like someone desperately clinging to scraps of authority. Her home, once immaculate, began showing subtle signs of decline. The perfect hedges grew uneven, a single weed pushed through the cracks of her walkway, and packages no longer appeared on her doorstep with the same frequency. Without her business humming in the background, she seemed adrift. But Karen wasn't the type to retreat quietly. One evening, just as the neighborhood was beginning to exhale in relief, a new message appeared in the HOA forum. It was long, rambling, and dripping with venom. Karen accused the board of corruption, claimed the police raid had been staged, and insisted that I was the real criminal, a dangerous neighbor harboring secrets. She threw wild accusations like confetti, linking me to everything from tax fraud to dog breeding rings. The post was met with silence at first, then a wave of disbelief. Neighbors had seen enough of Karen's tactics to recognize the desperation. Some replied with humor, others with sharp criticism, but most simply ignored her, starving her of the attention she craved. That should have been the end of it. But Karen wasn't finished. Within days, flyers appeared in mailboxes across the neighborhood. Printed on cheap paper, riddled with typos, they carried the same baseless accusations she had posted online. My name, my address, even grainy photos of Max were plastered across the page, accompanied by dramatic warnings about dangerous activities taking place in my home. I stood in my driveway, holding the crumpled flyer in my hand, anger boiling in my chest. This wasn't just HOA drama anymore. Karen was trying to ruin my reputation, turning me into the villain in a story she had written for herself. Neighbors rallied behind me, assuring me they didn't believe a word of it, but the damage was real. Rumors travel fast, and even the most loyal friends couldn't stop a seed of doubt from being planted in the wider community. Karen had always known how to weaponize perception, and now she was using it with reckless abandon. Her desperation didn't stop at words. Late one night, a neighbor's security camera captured Karen sneaking across lawns, slipping envelopes into mail slots. Inside each was a handwritten note, begging for support, warning of corruption in the HOA, painting herself as a whistleblower silenced for telling the truth. She was trying to rally an army, but her pleas fell flat. Instead of gaining allies, she became a spectacle, the subject of group chats and late-night laughter. The board had grown tired of her antics and began formal proceedings to remove her from the HOA entirely. It wasn't just suspension anymore, it was exile. Karen would no longer have a voice in the community she once ruled with an iron fist. That's when she crossed the final line. It was a Saturday morning when I noticed the commotion. Neighbors gathered at the end of the cul-de-sac, whispering and pointing toward Karen's house. Parked out front was a moving truck, its engine idling, while two men in uniform carried boxes out of her home. At first, I thought she had finally decided to leave on her own, but then I saw the sheriff's vehicle parked nearby. This wasn't voluntary. It was eviction. The fraudulent business had caught up with her. Between the police investigation, unpaid fines, and mounting legal troubles, Karen was losing not just her power, she was losing her home. And yet, even in defeat, she refused to go quietly. Standing on her porch, surrounded by boxes, she hurled insults at anyone within earshot. She accused neighbors of betrayal, called the board a cult, and shouted my name more than once, insisting I had orchestrated her downfall. Her voice was hoarse, desperate, filled with a rage that bordered on madness. The sheriff's deputies urged her to calm down, but Karen had never known how to surrender. She clung to the railing, shouting until her voice cracked, until the last box was loaded onto the truck, until the keys were taken from her trembling hands. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence as the truck pulled away, carrying the remnants of Karen's empire with it. For years, she had been the storm that loomed over us, and now, in a single morning, she was gone. But even as her taillights disappeared down the road, I couldn't shake the unease. People like Karen didn't just vanish. They lingered like a shadow, their presence felt long after they'd left. The neighbors celebrated quietly that evening, relief spreading through the cul-de-sac like a fresh breeze. Conversations turned to lighter topics, children played without fear of being scolded, and laughter returned to porches where silence had reigned. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, was this truly the end? Or was Karen out there, plotting her next move, waiting for the right moment to return? For now, the storm had passed. But I knew better than to believe it was gone for good. Because with Karen, it never really was. When Karen's moving truck vanished from sight, the cul-de-sac felt different. For years, her presence had been a constant weight pressing down on the neighborhood. Every backyard barbecue, every child's birthday party, every simple dog walk had been shadowed by the possibility of her interference. Now, the silence left behind was almost disorienting. At first, no one knew quite how to react. People peeked through blinds, unsure if it was real, half expecting her to storm back into the street with a clipboard in hand, barking about violations and rules. But as the days passed, the reality sank in. Karen was gone. The neighborhood began to breathe again. Porch lights glowed later into the evening, laughter carried further on the breeze, and small gatherings became commonplace. Without the constant threat of complaints or HOA fines, people rediscovered the joy of community. Even Max, my loyal dog, seemed to sense the change. He trotted through the yard with a lightness in his step, barking freely, no longer silenced by the fear of Karen's wrath. Still, the remnants of her reign lingered. Flyers were found crumpled in gutters, her scrawled handwriting a reminder of her final desperate attempts to sow division. The HOA board meetings shifted focus from damage control to rebuilding trust. They discussed amending bylaws, ensuring that no single person could ever again wield the unchecked power Karen once had. It wasn't just about restoring order, it was about healing. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves now came together, united by the shared relief of her absence. Old grievances melted away in the glow of collective victory. The woman who tried to pit everyone against each other had, ironically, given them a reason to unite. But Karen's shadow wasn't entirely gone. News traveled quickly, and rumors about her surfaced every few days. Some claimed she had moved in with relatives across town. Others whispered that she was facing lawsuits for the fraudulent business she had run out of her home. A few swore they had seen her car parked near the neighborhood late at night, though no one could confirm it. Her name became more of a ghost story than a threat. Children joked about Karen sightings, daring each other to ride their bikes past her empty house after dark. The property itself stood as a monument to her downfall. The once pristine lawn grew patchy, paint peeled from shutters, and weeds spread through the garden beds. For sale signs appeared, disappeared, and reappeared, but the house remained empty, its windows reflecting only silence. As for me, life took on a new rhythm. Without Karen's constant interference, I had the freedom to enjoy my home the way it was meant to be enjoyed. I hosted gatherings in my backyard, unbothered by phantom complaints. Max became the unofficial mascot of the street, beloved by children and neighbors alike. The same dog Karen had tried to ban was now a symbol of resilience, a reminder of what we had endured and overcome. But the neighborhood never forgot what she had done. Karen's story became a cautionary tale, retold at block parties and whispered to newcomers. She was the neighbor who tried to control everything, who waged war over petty grievances, who hid an illegal empire behind the facade of suburban perfection. And in the end, she was the one undone by her own schemes. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Karen had accused me of being disruptive, had tried to silence my dog, had painted me as the villain of the neighborhood. Yet it was her actions, her greed, her arrogance, her obsession with control, that led to her downfall. The police who once arrived at her request had eventually stood on her porch, keys in hand, escorting her out of the very home she weaponized against others. The balance of power had shifted, permanently. In the months that followed, the HOA took deliberate steps to repair its image. Transparency became the new standard, with open meetings, shared budgets, and clear guidelines for enforcement. The board wanted to ensure no one could ever again twist the system for personal gain. Where Karen had ruled with fear, the new HOA operated with fairness. And the neighbors? They flourished. Gardens bloomed, children played freely, and friendships deepened. The cul-de-sac that had once felt like a battleground was now a haven. People lingered on porches, waved across driveways, and offered helping hands when needed. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and after living under Karen's rule, peace was more valuable than perfection. Every now and then, though, I would catch myself glancing at her old house, its windows dark, its mailbox empty. Part of me expected to see her silhouette in the upstairs window, arms crossed, watching, waiting. But the house remained still, a shell of what it once was, as if it too had been drained of Karen's venom. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops and the street was bathed in golden light, I stood in my yard with Max at my side. He barked once, sharp and clear, the sound echoing through the cul-de-sac. Instead of complaints, laughter followed. Neighbors waved, children clapped, and Max wagged his tail proudly. In that moment, I realized the true victory wasn't just Karen's eviction, or the exposure of her fraudulent business. The real triumph was reclaiming the neighborhood, restoring it to what it should have always been, a place of community, trust, and freedom. Karen had tried to ban my dog. She had tried to paint me as the enemy. But in doing so, she revealed herself for what she truly was. And in the end, she lost everything. The storm she created had passed, and the neighborhood stood stronger than before. Karen's name might linger in whispers, her story might live on as a warning, but her power was gone. And as Max barked again, carefree and unchallenged, I knew one thing for certain: this was our neighborhood now.